Hi everyone, I am Charlotte from thereadoutable.com and this is Story Coaching. We are on episode 5 of season 2 and this is all about fixing problem characters. So way back when I finished my first book, the first draft of my first book, and then I'd gone through and sort of fixed up, I took it to a number of people for feedback. Including some experienced authors that I knew, just some people, some friends that read a lot. I was really just looking for as much feedback as I could, and I got really good feedback, but I heard one thing consistently, that was I had one character that nobody liked, and everyone thought I should just take out of the book altogether. But the problem was, this character became very important in books 2 and 3, so he needed to be there. We needed to know what his story was. We needed him. I really felt, anyhow, looking at the story I was trying to tell, I really felt that he needed to be there. And so I was getting all of this feedback saying, just take him out. He's awful. And to be fair, I mean, he was a pretty much useless drunk starship captain, just like stumbling around, telling people not to do things and creating obstacles for no apparent reason. And that was a really difficult time because no one really knew how to tell me to fix him. Really the only solution I was presented with at that time was remove him from the novel, and of course I knew that I couldn't do that. And so I needed to dig really deep and really look into, how can I make this pretty unsavory, pretty unlikable character more engaging for readers? How could I make him someone that, even if they weren't really rooting for him, I wanted them, of course, to be rooting for him, but at least they weren't getting annoyed, they weren't putting the book down because of his scenes where we're really getting into his story. So that's really why I got inspired to do this episode for you guys, is because you might be experiencing a character issue where people are saying, I just don't like this character, and maybe you're not getting great feedback on how to fix them. So the first thing I want to say is that there really is no such thing as a problem character. There's just problem storytelling. And if you are receiving the feedback that you've got a character who's not very likable, or isn't, we'll talk about, some different problems. If you're receiving some feedback on your character that they are a problem, you do have to evaluate, is this a character that has a role to play in the story? Is this a character that is just there because I think, they're kind of cool? Then we need to really assess, does the character belong? Or is there something that we can do to make the character belong? And then how do we present the character in a way that is more favorable to, that's more favorable to readers? All right, so let's get into it. Some common character problems. I think some feedback that you might hear is that you've got a flat character or you've got a two-dimensional character. And I should say we're talking about, if you've received some feedback, but it's good to check these things for yourself if you've got just a work in progress that you're working through. These are going to be some great tips to hopefully prevent problems from coming up in the future for you. So the first one is, is a character flat? Or are they two-dimensional? And this usually, means that the character doesn't really look like a human being. They are just kind of a prop going through the story. There's not enough depth to them. There's not enough understanding of who they are as a human being. And so that's commonly what you'll hear when people say flat. You can also have an inconsistent character. So these are, I find inconsistent characters really frustrating. So you might also just hear that, someone is frustrated with this character, but maybe they can't quite put words into it. So an inconsistent character is a character where we just don't understand their goals and their motivations. They seem to flip-flop. They're trying one thing, they're trying another thing. the example I always give is myself. So kind of a weird, quirky thing with me is I do not like cooked fruit at all. Like, apple pie is like the worst thing you could like present to me. Which I know lots of people love cooked fruit, but I just don't. And, but that said, every now and then, I will enjoy like, a nice like Saskatoon berry crumble with some cold ice cream and so that's kind of like an inconsistency, and it really surprises everyone around me when, we were probably like a year ago. It doesn't happen very often. About a year ago, it must have been more than a year ago because of COVID, but we were at a restaurant and I ordered the Saskatoon berry pie with lots of ice cream, and everyone at the table just sort of went, huh? So that, as a real person, I have some inconsistencies, but when you're an observer and you're watching a character has an inconsistency like that, it's very surprising. And I think it annoys readers. It annoys me because I like to think that I've got a good handle on everything in the story. And I like to engage my kind of detective brain as I'm reading to try to figure out what's going to happen and how a character is going to deal with something. So if I'm predicting that the character is going to order, the chocolate cake because she loves chocolate, and suddenly she orders the Saskatoon pie, even though she hates, cooked fruit and fruit pies in general, I'm going to be really thrown off, and I'm going to feel not very good about my detective skills. So I think that's usually the situation when someone is saying, either the character is frustrating or the character is inconsistent. Another common problem you might hear is unrelatable or unrealistic. And that's pretty straightforward. It's a character that, really just doesn't seem like a human being, because they're either way too good at everything. That's the classic, like, Mary Sue, just way too good at everything and solving everyone's problems. Or maybe the problems that they do have, or the goals that they do have, people just have trouble connecting to them. They're not like goals that the average person would have. And not that you can't use that, but you must be very careful to bring it back to a relatable level. So we'll talk about how to do that a little bit more in the next couple minutes here. And then the last one that you might hear is the same thing I heard, which is that the character is unlikable or they're annoying. People just get like, they just have like a visceral reaction when they walk onto the page or they're in a scene and they're like, what is this buffoon gonna do? And really, I think unlikable is just a character has gone so far into unredeemable. They just seem to not have any purpose. It's not like a villain that's a bad guy that has, goals and motivations. An unlikable character, I think, just wanders around and doesn't have much purpose, and so people don't feel that they have a purpose in the story, and so it's kind of a waste of time to read about something or someone that doesn't have a purpose in your story. So those are the things that you might hear from someone like a beta reader or even just a family member that's reading your manuscript and says, I just don't like this character. And so how do we fix it? It all really goes back to character design. It goes back to kind of that really base level story planning that I talk about in the story planning guide, in the Right Now program, in the Pick Up the Pen challenge, all of it. It really goes back to understanding the core of our character, as opposed to what a lot of people focus on, which is kind of the external physical traits that we can see. Including, what are their actions. It really is looking much deeper, is looking at the core. And so when we're fixing a flat character, so this is a character that just doesn't have much depth. They just don't look like a human being. They're more like a cardboard cutout. The best thing we can do is add layers to their personality. And so what do I mean by layers? So I look at the mental, emotional, and physical layers of a personality. So physical is pretty easy to understand. That is what they look like, what their, actual physical abilities are. Are they tall? Are they short? Are they strong? Are they weak? And also the actions that they're taking. So do they run and jump up the building, or do they take the stairs? So physical, a lot of people, that's usually where you're sitting if you've got a flat character, because that's an easy thing for us to access. As a writer, as a human being, that's how we think, usually is on the physical level. But we also want to be looking at the mental level. And so this is the layer of thoughts. What are they thinking? How are they making decisions? And then also on the emotional level, how are they feeling? So instead of just, character, I'm thinking of weird examples today, but like Spider-Man decides he's going to climb up the outside of the building instead of going inside and taking the stairs. So if we were writing him as a character in a novel, a comic book's a bit different because it's quite visual, but if we were writing him as, or even in a comic book, you've got thought bubbles. So we'd want to look at the mental aspect, which is, his thoughts saying, I need to take the stair, or I need to climb the outside of the building because it's so much faster. Or maybe he's halfway up and he's like, man, I should have taken the stairs. This is exhausting. And then the emotional level is, I've got to get to the top to save the damsel in distress, and his feelings about everything else going on. So we want to add those layers to all of our characters as much as possible in every aspect. And if you follow along the Pick Up the Pen challenge, we really talk about how to bring that emotional and mental level in, how we need those aspects in order to drive all of the physical action that we're seeing in the action cycle. The other thing that we want in all of our characters, but flat characters particularly, we want to make sure that they have goals. We need them to be working towards something, and that really actually goes to the emotional level, which is what is it that they want in order to feel a certain way, usually satisfied or happy or confident, or that they have contributed effectively. But really, what is their goal? And then have them work towards that goal. That adds so much to a character. And for a flat character, we want to be adding conflict, where we probably are a little bit deficient in conflict, both internal and external, but particularly with a flat character, particularly internal conflict is probably a little bit low. And internal conflict really comes from values clashing. So we need to go back to character planning and look at what are their values, and also how do those values relate to the goals, and how do those values interfere with each other, so that the character has to make some tough internal decisions on that mental level about how they're going to proceed and move forward. The other thing that can help with flat characters is quirks and flaws. With any character, you're just adding a little bit more conflict. If you've got some flaws or some struggles that they're going to have to overcome, again, particularly internally, very effective in fixing a flat character. And quirks are really, quirks don't have to be negative, they can be positive, so they can provide a kind of a light to an otherwise maybe difficult story or difficult character. The best one really, the best example is a good sense of humor, and we'll talk about that because it becomes it's very effective for fixing some other personality or character flaws. But quirks and flaws can be really good for creating that balance between like pluses and negatives in a character too. And for flat characters, growth and questioning. We talk a lot about Last week we talked about character arcs. I always talk about what is the belief shift that the main character has to go through. And so for a flat character, we really want to look at the internal growth, again, on that mental level, on the emotional level, the growth, the questioning, what they're doing and what's going on. That's going to lead them to their belief shift. We want to make sure that we're really bringing that to the surface. All right, so for fixing inconsistent characters, so these are characters who, in one scene, are motivated by one thing, and in the next scene are motivated by something different, and we can't really figure out or predict where they're going to go next. So the first thing you want to do is really go back to basics here. Go back to character development, story planning, and look at their goals, look at their motives, look at their beliefs. Really try to tap in deeply to what it is that the character wants and why they want it. We're really talking here again about that mental, emotional level. But with the inconsistent character, we really want to be sure that we've got a consistent goal. And characters, of course, can have more than one goal, but we want, but they're always going to have to rank those goals. And there will be one goal that is most important. And so the most important goal stays the most important, the second most important stays the second most important, etc. And their motives are always going to be the same, and the beliefs are going to be the same. With the exception of course, especially if they're a main character, they need to have a belief change through the course of the story. And I think that knowing that they need to have that belief change can unfortunately create some of these inconsistent characters when we're trying to make the change happen too fast or too suddenly. So we really want to be in our planning and plotting phases, looking at what is the belief change, what's the core belief shift, and what are the baby steps to get them there. Belief change doesn't just happen overnight. It's not a sudden, rapid change. It does need to be done in steps. And so often you're going to have a character who, starts out with one belief, they're so certain of it, and then some things happen where they kind of go, hey, wait, I don't understand. And they're starting to question. They're starting to think about alternatives to this belief. They're starting to try little micro versions of the new belief. And they might have success or they might have failure, but they're doing micro changes. And it's not until the end when all of these micro changes add up and lead to the big belief shift at the end. So if you've got an inconsistent character, make sure that you're not trying to take them through a belief shift too quickly. And if you are having them experiment and try different ways of doing things, you can make them self-aware of those inconsistencies. And really what this looks like is they're explaining their choices. You might have a character who just comes out and says, hey, normally I do this, but it really didn't work last time, and so I'm going to try this instead. And that all of a sudden explains away all of the inconsistency. The reader understands exactly why they're doing what they're doing. They probably are going to connect with them more deeply because they know that this character is struggling to figure out how things work and how to achieve their goals. So very effective to have your character just be self-aware and explain their thinking. The other thing that can be very helpful is backstory. So I told you my little quirk with cooked fruit that does make me inconsistent. And if I was to tell you, the whole backstory was, I said absolutely not to cooked fruit for the first 30 years of my life. And a few years ago, someone handed me a big bowl of it was Saskatoon cobbler and a huge amount of ice cream. And I was kind of in a position where it was really awkward to say, oh, no, thank you. So I just kind of, ate it and actually ended up really enjoying it through a combination of kind of the situation and everything. So every now and then I want that experience to be repeated. So that's the whole backstory. And if I had shared that backstory with you in the beginning and then later said, hey, I'm kind of in the mood for some cooked fruit, you would be right on board with me too. So just understanding that the power of backstory and sharing that backstory can really help explain any inconsistencies if they're inconsistencies that you are aware of and that are purposeful in the story. And let's move on to unrelatable and unrealistic characters. So these are either characters that are so good at everything that the everyday person can't really connect to them, or maybe they have some really out there kind of beliefs and beliefs and goals that the everyday person isn't really on board with. And I mentioned that there is a way to do it, absolutely. And so when we're looking at if they've got unrelatable goals, we actually want to be looking deeper at the goal. So if, the example that comes to mind is if we've got some terribly rich person and they just want to secure themselves, this limited edition Aston Martin, and that's all that they care about, and that's the whole story. For many of us, we're like, come on, like none of the rest of us can really relate to that. And if you can, good for you, excellent. But what is the actual reason why they want that super fancy car, super expensive car, when they have so much money they can have everything else? They can fulfill all of the desires that us regular people might have. And you want to be looking at the motivations. You want to be looking again at the layers. What is the thought process? What is the emotion behind it? If he wants to, if I said he, let's make it a she. If she wants to have this really fancy car because she thinks it will impress her, the people she went to high school with who always made fun of her, if she thinks it's going to help her win back her boyfriend, all of a sudden these become very human things. And so she wants this fancy car, but what she really wants is something that all of us can relate to. And so when we look at it that way, what we're really able to do is tap into empathy. We're tapping into a feeling that is universal, a feeling that every person can relate to. We've all wanted to impress our friends or show up, the bullies at high school. Absolutely. So that is something that we can connect to. And if the story is about an Aston Martin, but we drive, a Taurus, then fabulous. Then it doesn't even matter because we're still on the same base level. Right? So really we want to be looking at creating more empathy with these characters. And the other thing that can be really helpful if we've got someone who is kind of unrealistic, if they are really just good at everything, and everybody loves them, and they've had this kind of golden life, we want to be adding flaws. We want to be adding quirks. We want to be having things that take them from, this level of perfection back into normal, back into a regular experience. And this is really about balancing the traits. So for every good trait or everything that this character excels at, there's going to be a bad trait, some obstacle. Some might even call it the price, right? So if you're really smart, maybe you're not great with people. If you're really strong, maybe you're not that smart. There's always this idea of balance so that everyone has something that they're good at and something that they're bad at. And the better you are at one thing, the worse you are at something different. And I think a lot of us humans, we can relate to that as well, knowing that we always do have to balance our lives. We always have to choose one good thing, or choose what am I trying to say? Choose the positive trait that we want to build and work on, knowing that it's going to come at the cost of not having the time to maybe work on another trait. So having that balance starts to make characters more realistic, and having the balance and the clear goal that goes back to kind of a root level, an emotional level, makes them very relatable. And the last trick that you can use if you've got a character who maybe you're not ready to reveal some of that stuff yet, and they're just kind of difficult to connect to, you can introduce into the story a friend. So someone that is connected to this character already, who is empathetic with this character, who understands this character, and who is rooting for this character, because that will create, basically kind of opens the door for a reader to say, oh, well, this person thinks that, this unrelatable character is actually, a nice guy, is a friend, and encourages the reader to at least take a second look and decide if maybe there is something more to this character. It's this idea of social proof, or that fear of missing out, where if one person likes something, we're going to take another evaluation and see if maybe we like it too. Maybe there's something there that we missed that this person can see. All right. And then lastly, unlikable characters. So we want to be balancing those traits again, balancing the good and the bad. Especially if you've got, kind of a surly old man, there's going to be some kind of good quality that comes out, to balance out the the negative. And one of the most effective ways to do this is to have some sort of example of their selflessness, some thing that shows how they are. How they actually care about people around them, that they have, kind of a warm heart, even if they've got this cold, crusty exterior. We often want to make that, a little bit secret. We might add that into a backstory so that we can have more compassion for them for where they are in their lives. Maybe they have experienced some really nasty, some really nasty stuff in their past, and they want, that's shaped them, and that's changed how they are, and that's turned them into this nasty person. One of the best examples is if we look at The Lord of the Rings, if we look at Gollum, this sort of gross, creepy, pretty unpleasant character. But when we start to see his backstory, when we understand that he used to be a creature not unlike a hobbit, and that he found this ring and went from being a nice, normal person to killing his friend, to becoming this thing that was Gollum through the power of the ring. I mean, one, it adds to the main story, but it also helps us understand Gollum that much better. And once we understand him, we have empathy for him. The other thing that can be really helpful for unlikable characters is not necessarily making them more likable, but making the reader more interested in them through creating mystery. And this is often best done by dropping little bits of backstory piece by piece. But the reader starts to become more interested in the character when they're starting to think about why they might be the way that they are, and they're probably having some hope that there's something good there, that there's some empathy. But adding in that mystery element can also really help with unlikable characters, and as well adding in a self-awareness element. So if you've got, again, this gruff old detective type, and he does something that's not very nice in the heat of the moment, and he walks away, and he said, and you can see his thoughts, you can see that mental emotional level where he's actually upset. He knows that he didn't do a good thing, whatever it was. That self-awareness really can redeem him in the eyes of the reader. So those are some great tips. I mean, really, you want to be thinking about these things in all of your characters. But for each of those, flaws, there are some hopefully some solutions that will help you out. And really, I want to tell you, all of your characters, they can be enjoyable characters. No matter kind of what the initial feedback is, there is a way to fix them if they need to be fixed. Sometimes you may realize that they're not an important part of the story. And so all those characters can be really enjoyable characters, even the really wretched ones, even my grumpy old starship captain. And what I ended up doing with him was, I knew that he was unlikable because he really just kind of grumped around. And his whole goal was to thwart the goals of the others, but he's doing that because he more than anything wants to keep them all safe. And so I really worked hard to increase how much I was talking about that, how much I was sharing his thoughts, that mental and emotional level, so that people understood that his goal wasn't to be, an a-hole. His goal was to help everyone. And maybe he was doing some things that didn't make a lot of sense, but I started dropping a lot of his backstory, which was very important for the whole book, so it was good that it was coming out, but I dropped it a lot earlier so that people understood, he's been through some trauma, he's seen some things that make him believe that the actions he's taking are the right actions. And I also, gave him a friend. I really upped his romantic interest and the relationship between them, where she also has empathy for him, although she loses it halfway through because he is kind of a bear, and added in another friend through his backstory, through sharing the backstory. So gave him a lot of those pieces to make him more empathetic, to add the reader curiosity, and to help the reader understand that there is a reason why he is this way, and that he is acting in what he believes is the best interest of everyone. Right. So, and that book, by the way, is called Augment, written under C.R. McFarlane, and you can find it on Amazon, anywhere if you are interested in checking out what I did with him, because he is a mess. So, and I did just want to let you know, I mentioned a few times, the Pick Up the Pen challenge really goes over creating much more of that mental and emotional level, helping share a character at a deeper level, which I believe is really at the core of flawed characters. If you've done your effective character design and they have goals and motivations, then it's really just a matter of, are we sharing them in an effective way? And I think, one of the best ways that I have available to help you with that is the Pick Up the Pen challenge. It is now available on demand, which means you plug in your email. It'll send you to a website that has all of the daily lessons there, and you can go through them on your own time. And that's at thewritable.com/pickupthepen. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining me. We've got another exciting episode coming next week, so I will see you then. Until then, happy writing.